My son told everyone I had nothing left. Then he saw what I kept in the safe. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just after 7. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a coffee cup I had used 3 times that day, when my phone buzzed against the counter. The screen showed my son's name, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that had replaced whatever warmth used to live there. "Dad," Marcus said, and I could hear the strain beneath the word, the way it came out thin and hurried. "I need to talk to you. It's important." I dried my hands on the dish towel, the same one Eleanor had embroidered with small blue flowers 20 years ago. "I'm listening." "Not on the phone. Can I come over? Tonight?" I looked around my kitchen, at the clean counters and the single plate drying in the rack, at the silence that had become my companion. "The door's unlocked," I said. He hung up without saying goodbye. That had become his habit over the past 3 years, these abrupt endings, as though even the small courtesies of conversation were more than he could spare for me. I set the phone down and walked to the living room window, watching the street grow dim in the early autumn light. The maple in the front yard had begun to turn, its leaves edged with the first gold of the season. I knew why he was calling. I had known for 6 weeks, ever since I saw the notice in the business section of the local paper. Marcus's development company, the one he had built with loans and confidence and the assumption that the market would never turn against him, was facing a lawsuit from 3 of its investors. The amount mentioned was substantial, the kind of substantial that doesn't disappear with clever accounting or optimistic projections. What I didn't know yet was what he thought I could do about it, or rather, what he thought I had left to give. I settled into my chair by the window and waited. The man who walked through my door 40 minutes later was not the son I had raised. Or perhaps he was, and I had simply refused to see it clearly until Eleanor's death stripped away the softening lens of family hope. Marcus was 43 now, broad across the shoulders like his grandfather, with the kind of tan that comes from golf courses and resort vacations rather than honest outdoor work. He wore a sport coat over a polo shirt, the uniform of men who want to appear casual while communicating that casualness costs them nothing. "Dad," he said again, and this time the word carried something else, a calculation, an assessment. I gestured to the chair across from mine. "Sit down." He looked around the room first, and I watched his eyes catalog what he saw. The furniture that had been in this house for 30 years, the shelves where Eleanor's books still stood in their careful arrangements, the absence of anything new, anything expensive, anything that suggested prosperity. I had watched him perform this inventory before, at family gatherings and holiday dinners, his gaze sliding over surfaces and finding them wanting. But tonight there was something hungrier in the looking, something more urgent. "Can I get you anything?" I asked. "There's coffee, water." "I'm fine." He sat down heavily, the chair creaking under his weight. He had put on 15 pounds since his mother's funeral, the kind of weight that settles around the middle and speaks of stress eaten rather than addressed. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something serious." I assumed as much. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and I saw the posture he used in business meetings, the one designed to convey sincerity and partnership. I'd seen him practice it in his 20s, standing before the bathroom mirror in the house he grew up in, rehearsing for job interviews. Even then, it had struck me as something borrowed rather than felt. "The company's in trouble," he said. "You've probably heard." I read the paper. "It's worse than what they printed. The investors are claiming fraud. It's not true, none of it's true, but the legal fees alone are going to be—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I need help, Dad." I let the silence stretch between us. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping across the window and then away. "What kind of help?" "Financial help. A loan. Something to get me through the next 6 months while we fight this." I nodded slowly, as though considering. "How much?" 300,000, maybe 350. The number hung in the air, enormous and absurd. I thought about what $300,000 meant to a man sitting in a house with 30-year-old furniture, a man whose son had spent the past 3 years telling anyone who would listen that his father had nothing left. "Marcus," I said quietly, "where do you think that money would come from?" His jaw tightened. "I know you sold the lake house and the rental properties. I know Mom's jewelry went somewhere." You know a lot of things. I know you've been living like this." He gestured at the room around us, the gesture containing everything he thought about modest furniture and embroidered dish towels and a life without the markers of success he had learned to measure by. "But there has to be something left. You worked for 40 years. Mom had her inheritance. It couldn't all just disappear." I looked at my son, at the expensive watch on his wrist and the desperation in his eyes, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Something older and quieter than anger, something that had been building for a very long time. "Let me tell you what I remember," I said. "I remember the day Eleanor told me she was sick, not the diagnosis itself, which came later in a sterile office with charts and percentages and words that turned the woman I loved into a collection of failing systems. But the day before that, when she sat me down in this same living room and said she had been feeling tired in a way that didn't lift with sleep. 'I didn't want to worry you,' she said, 'but I think we need to find out what's wrong.' She was 71 years old, and in all the years of our marriage, she had never once complained about her health without cause. I held her hand and told her we would see the doctor in the morning, and that night I lay awake beside her, listening to her breathe, already beginning to understand that something was ending. The cancer was aggressive. The doctors used words like advanced and palliative and quality of life, and I watched my wife absorb each one with the same quiet dignity she had brought to everything. She had 14 months. She used them well. What I remember most about those months is how our children responded to them. Our daughter, Rachel, flew in from Seattle the week after the diagnosis. She took a leave from her job, rented an apartment 20 minutes away, and spent every day she could at our house. She learned Eleanor's medication schedule. She drove her to appointments. She sat with her in the garden on warm afternoons, the two of them talking in low voices about things I was not always meant to hear. Marcus came to visit 3 times. The first visit lasted 4 hours. He had a meeting, he explained, something that couldn't be moved. The second visit was for a weekend, most of which he spent on his phone in the guest room. The third was for the funeral. At the reception afterward, held in this house, I overheard him talking to his wife's brother in the kitchen. They didn't know I was in the hallway, or perhaps they didn't care. "The house has to be worth something," Marcus was saying, "and there's the investments. Dad was always careful with money. Think he'll help you out now that she's gone? He'd better. I'm his only son." I stood in that hallway for a long moment, listening to my son calculate the value of his mother's death, and I made a decision that would shape everything that followed. The liquidation took 8 months. I sold the lake house first, the one where we had spent summers when the children were young, where Marcus had learned to swim and Rachel had filled journals with stories about imaginary kingdoms in the woods. The market was strong, and I found a buyer who planned to keep it as a family retreat. That mattered to me in ways I didn't fully examine. The rental properties went next. 3 small houses in the old part of town, purchased decades ago when such things were possible on a teacher's salary with careful saving. Eleanor and I had managed them ourselves for 30 years, fixing leaky faucets and replacing worn carpets and learning the names of every tenant's children. I sold them to a local investor who promised to maintain them properly, and I believed her because I had learned, over a long life, to recognize people whose word meant something. Eleanor's jewelry I handled differently. The valuable pieces, the ones her mother had passed down through 3 generations, I gave to Rachel. She wept when I handed her the velvet box, and I held her while she cried, and neither of us said anything about her brother. The other pieces, the ones Eleanor had collected over our marriage, I sold quietly through an estate dealer in the city. A woman with gray hair and careful hands who understood that these transactions carried weight beyond their dollar value. By the time I was finished, my visible assets had been reduced to this house, my pension, and a modest checking account. Anyone looking at my life from the outside would see an old man living alone in dated comfort, getting by on fixed income, possessing nothing of particular value. This is what Marcus saw. This is what he told people. I first heard about his commentary through Rachel, who called me one evening with hesitation in her voice. "Dad, I need to tell you something about Marcus." "Go ahead." "He's been saying things at family events to people we know." She paused, and I could hear her choosing her words. He's telling everyone you're broke, that you spent everything on Mom's medical care, and now you've got nothing left. He says it like it's... She stopped. Like it's what? Like it's proof you don't matter anymore. I absorbed this in silence. Outside my window, the seasons had turned again, and snow was falling in the early darkness. He told Aunt Catherine that he's basically supporting you emotionally, since you can't contribute anything else. He told his father-in-law that he's the successful one in the family because he had to be, since you couldn't provide opportunities the way other fathers did. I see. Dad, it's not true. Any of it. You gave us everything. You paid for our educations. You helped Marcus with his first business loan, the one he never paid back. You and Mom were always there. I know what we did. Then why are you letting him say these things? I considered the question carefully. Because people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching, or when they think there's nothing left to lose. But your reputation, my reputation, is with people who know me. What Marcus tells strangers at parties doesn't change who I am. Rachel was quiet for a moment. There's something else. He stopped inviting you to things, the kids' birthdays, holiday dinners. He told Jennifer it would be awkward to have you there when everyone knows you can't afford to bring gifts. I closed my eyes. I thought about my grandchildren, about the way the youngest one, Maya, used to run to me at family gatherings with her arms open wide. I hadn't seen her in 8 months. Thank you for telling me, I said. What are you going to do? What I've always done. I'm going to wait and watch and remember. The safe in my study is not large. It sits in the corner behind my desk, a gray metal box that looks like exactly what it is, the kind of fireproof container an ordinary man might use to store birth certificates and property deeds. I had it installed 30 years ago when the children were young and the house felt full of precious things that needed protecting. What Marcus didn't know, what he had never thought to ask about, was what had gone into that safe after his mother died. The cash came first. I'm not a man who distrusts banks, but I'm a man who understands that liquidity matters in a crisis. After the sales were complete, I converted a portion of my holdings into currency, stored in sealed envelopes with dates written on the outside. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough. The documents came next, records of every financial transaction I had conducted in the past 3 years, copies of the deeds before I transferred them, appraisals and assessments and market analysis that showed in clear black numbers exactly what Eleanor and I had built over 40 years of careful stewardship. And then there were the other papers, the ones I had gathered slowly, methodically, in the months after I first heard my son talking about my worthlessness in my own kitchen. Bank statements showing the loans Marcus had taken against assets he didn't fully own, court filings from previous business disputes, the ones that had been settled quietly before they could become public. A folder of emails forwarded to me by a former employee of his company who had left under difficult circumstances and wanted someone to know the truth about how Marcus conducted his affairs. I did not gather this information with any specific plan. I gathered it the way a careful man gathers anything, because knowledge is a form of protection, and because I had begun to understand that my son was not the person I had hoped he would become. But now, sitting across from him in my living room, watching him ask for money he believed I didn't have while wearing a watch that cost more than my monthly pension, I understood that the gathering had been preparation for this moment. Let me tell you what I remember, I said again. I remember the loan I gave you when you started your first company. $50,000, which you promised to repay within 5 years. Marcus shifted in his chair. That was a long time ago. It was 14 years ago. You never repaid $1 of it. You never mentioned it again. When your mother asked about it once, at Thanksgiving, you told her it was complicated, and she let it go because she loved you and didn't want to fight. Dad, I remember the 3 years you didn't call her on her birthday, not because you were busy, though that's what you said. Because you were angry that we wouldn't co-sign on your mortgage. You punished your mother for 3 years because we wouldn't take on your debt. That's not fair. I remember the funeral. I remember you asking the estate lawyer about her will before she had been in the ground for 4 hours. I remember the look on Rachel's face when she heard you. Marcus's expression had shifted from calculation to something harder, something that looked like the first stirrings of genuine anger. If you're going to lecture me about the past, I'm not lecturing you. I'm telling you what I remember. Because you came here tonight to ask me for money, and you did so under a set of assumptions. You assumed I had nothing, because that's what you've been telling everyone. You assumed I would be grateful for your attention, because in your mind, a man without money has no value. You assumed you could walk into my house, sit in my chair, and ask me for $300,000 without once acknowledging the 1,000 small cruelties that brought us to this moment. I stood up then, slowly, feeling the familiar ache in my knees that comes with age. Come with me. The study was dark when we entered. I turned on the lamp by my desk, the one Eleanor had bought at an estate sale 40 years ago, and its warm light fell across the room in a familiar pattern. Marcus stood in the doorway, uncertain now, the anger replaced by something that might have been the beginning of fear. I knelt before the safe, blocking his view of the combination as I had always done, and opened it. The door swung outward with a soft click. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat. I remained standing, my hand resting on the open safe, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. 3 years ago, I said, when your mother died, I made a decision. I decided to find out who my son really was when he thought no one was watching, when he thought I had nothing left to offer or withhold, when the only calculations that mattered to him were about money and status and what he could extract from the world. I reached into the safe and withdrew the first envelope. I set it on the desk between us. That contains the current balance of a brokerage account I opened in 1987. It has grown considerably since then. Marcus stared at the envelope, but didn't touch it. This one contains the deed to a property in the coastal district, purchased 12 years ago and held in a trust your mother and I established. The property has appreciated significantly. A second envelope joined the first. This one contains documentation of a series of municipal bonds, also held in trust, which mature over the next 15 years, conservative investments, reliable income. A third envelope, and this one contains records of your business activities for the past decade, the loans you've taken out, the investors you've misled, the employees you've underpaid and the contractors you've stiffed, the corners you've cut and the lies you've told and the pattern of behavior that brought you to this moment, sitting in my study, asking me for money to save you from the consequences of your own choices. I set the fourth envelope on the desk and stepped back. I am not broke, Marcus. I have never been broke. What I am is careful and patient and very, very attentive. And what I have learned about you in the 3 years since your mother died has broken my heart in ways you will never understand. He reached for the fourth envelope first. Of course he did. I watched him open it, watched his face change as he flipped through the documents inside, watched him begin to understand that his father had been watching all along. Where did you get this? From people who had reason to tell me the truth, from public records that anyone can access if they know where to look, from the simple fact that you have never, in your entire adult life, been as clever as you believed yourself to be. He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Fear, yes, but beneath it, something rawer. The look of a child who has been caught in a lie and does not yet know how bad the punishment will be. What are you going to do? I sat down in my chair, across from him, the desk between us like a judgment. I'm going to tell you a story, I said, about a man I used to know. The man in the story was born to parents who worked hard for everything they had. His father was a machinist, his mother a seamstress, and together they saved enough to buy a small house in a neighborhood where children could play in the streets without fear. The man grew up understanding that money was not something that appeared by magic or entitlement, but something that was earned through labor and protected through discipline. He went to college on a scholarship and became a teacher, not because it paid well, but because he believed in the work. He met a woman who shared his values, who understood that wealth was measured in the lives you touched and the love you cultivated, not in the things you accumulated. Together, they raised 2 children. The man in the story made mistakes. He was sometimes too strict, sometimes too distant, sometimes so focused on providing for his family that he forgot to simply be present with them. But he tried every day to model the values he believed in: honesty, responsibility, The understanding that every choice has consequences and that a life well lived requires accepting those consequences with grace. One of his children understood these lessons, the other did not. "I was that man," I said to Marcus. "I am still that man. And you are my greatest failure." He flinched as though I had struck him. "Not because of your business troubles, not because of the money you've lost or the investors who are suing you. Those are the results of choices you made, and you will have to live with them. My failure is deeper than that." I leaned forward, holding his gaze. "My failure is that I raised a son who thinks money is the measure of a person, who abandoned his mother when she was dying, because there was nothing in it for him, who tells lies about his father at parties because he thinks a man without visible assets is a man without worth, who came to my house tonight after 3 years of cruelty and neglect, expecting me to write him a check because he is my blood." I shook my head slowly. "I gave you everything I could give, an education, opportunities, a loan that you never repaid, years of patience while you made choice after choice that told me who you were becoming. Your mother and I hoped every time that you would learn, that you would grow, that the boy we raised would somehow find his way back to the values we tried to teach him. Dad, but hope is not a strategy, and patience has limits, and 3 years of watching you calculate my worth while your mother's memory was still fresh, that was enough." I reached for the first 3 envelopes, the ones containing the evidence of what I actually possessed, and placed them back in the safe. I closed the door and spun the dial, and the click of the lock was the loudest sound in the room. "I will not give you money. Not now, not ever. If your business fails, it will fail because of decisions you made, and you will have to rebuild from the wreckage the same way your grandfather did, the same way your mother's family did, the same way everyone does who hasn't inherited a cushion to fall back on. You're going to let me lose everything? I'm going to let you experience the consequences of your own choices. That's not the same thing." He stared at me, and I watched the calculations happening behind his eyes, the anger, the disbelief, the desperate searching for leverage, for an angle, for some way to turn this situation to his advantage. "The documents," he said finally, "the ones about my business, what are you going to do with them?" "Nothing. Nothing. They're for my records, in case I ever need to explain, to anyone who matters, why I made the choices I made. But I'm not interested in destroying you, Marcus. I'm interested in protecting myself and honoring your mother's memory. Those documents are insurance, not weapons." He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You've been planning this, all of it. The whole time you've been sitting here, playing the poor old man, watching me. Watching you be exactly who you are," I said quietly. "Yes, that's what fathers do when they're paying attention. We watch. We hope. And when hope fails, we protect ourselves and the people who still deserve our protection." "Rachel," he said, the name bitter in his mouth. "She gets everything, doesn't she? Rachel gets what she's earned, which is a conversation I'm having with her, not with you." He moved toward the door, then stopped. For a moment, standing in the doorway of my study, he looked younger than his years, uncertain, lost. "I'm your son," he said. "You are, and that will always be true. But being my son doesn't mean you get to take whatever you want while treating me like an empty account to be drained. Being family means something. It means showing up. It means telling the truth. It means treating the people who love you with the same care you'd want them to show you." I stood and walked to where he was standing. "When you're ready to understand that, you know where to find me. The door will be unlocked. The coffee will be on. And we can try to find whatever's left of the relationship we might have had. And until then, you have a lawsuit to deal with. You have a business to save or lose. You have a wife and children who need a father who's present, not one who's always calculating the next angle. You have a life to live, Marcus. I suggest you start living it with more honesty than you've shown so far." He left without another word. I heard his car start in the driveway, heard it pull away and fade into the quiet of the evening. Then there was only silence, and the steady ticking of the clock Eleanor had bought on our honeymoon, and the weight of everything I had just done. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. I stood at the window and watched the street, the same view I had watched for 30 years, through every season and every change. The maple tree was bare now, its branches dark against the winter sky. I thought about the path that had brought me to this moment, the small choices and the large ones, the hopes I had carried and the disappointments I had learned to bear, the woman I had loved and lost and would carry with me until my own end came. And I thought about the safe in my study and what it contained and what it meant. Not power. I had never wanted power over my children. What it meant was clarity, the clarity that comes from knowing who you are and what you value, from building something solid over a lifetime and protecting it with care. The clarity that comes from watching someone reveal their true nature and accepting what you see, even when it breaks your heart. 2 weeks later, Rachel called. She had heard from Marcus, heard his version of what happened. He says you've been hoarding money, that you lied to everyone. Do you believe him? A pause. I believe you had reasons for what you did. I believe you and Mom always had reasons, even when we didn't understand them. Your mother and I built something together. We built it carefully, over 40 years. When she was gone, I had to decide what to do with what we'd built, how to protect it, how to make sure it served the purposes she would have wanted. And Marcus wasn't part of those purposes? I thought about how to answer. Marcus made choices. For years, he made choices that showed me who he was becoming. Your mother saw it too, near the end. She worried about him. But she also understood that some people have to find their own way to wisdom, and that protecting them from consequences isn't the same as helping them. What happens now? Now, we wait. Marcus will face his lawsuit. He'll win or lose on his own merits. And somewhere down the road, maybe years from now, he'll have the chance to decide what kind of man he really wants to be. And if he comes back? If he changes? I looked out the window at the winter light. Then we'll start again. That's what family does when it's real. Not because of blood or obligation, because of love. Because people are capable of change, even when it takes them a lifetime to find it. Rachel was quiet for a moment. I love you, Dad. I love you too. Come visit when you can. The coffee's always on. After we hung up, I sat in my chair and let the silence settle around me. The house was the same as it had always been. The furniture, the books, the photographs on the mantel, the embroidered dish towel in the kitchen, everything Eleanor and I had built, still standing, still solid, still mine. In the study, behind the closed door of the safe, the documents waited. Evidence of what I possessed, evidence of what I knew, evidence that a quiet life and modest surroundings can hide depths that the careless never think to look for. I had told Marcus that the door would always be unlocked. That was true. I had meant every word of what I said about family and second chances and the possibility of redemption. But I had also learned, in 74 years of living, that some people never find their way back. That hope has to be balanced with clear-eyed understanding. That love, real love, includes the willingness to let people face their own consequences, even when watching them struggle is the hardest thing you've ever done. The winter deepened. Snow fell and melted and fell again. I read my books and tended my small garden and talked to Rachel on the phone every Sunday. I did not hear from Marcus, and in the silence of my house, in the long evenings by the window, I made my peace with what I had done. Not because it was easy, because it was right, because Eleanor would have understood, because sometimes the truest form of love is the hardest one, the love that refuses to enable or excuse or look away. I had shown my son what was in the safe, not the money or the deeds or the careful accumulation of a lifetime. What I had shown him was the truth about who I was, the truth about who he had become, the truth about what family means when you strip away the calculations and the entitlements and the assumption that blood alone is enough to earn forgiveness. The rest was up to him. It always had been.